We'll call to order the Subcommittee on Communications and Technology, and certainly welcome our witness, Mr. Wilkins from the Federal Communications Commission. We're honored to have you with us today. We're here today to talk about the FCC's fiscal year 2016 budget request. Today, as we commence a series of hearings into the agency's reauthorization, I hope to start with the basics and take a close look at the Federal Communications Commission's budget request for fiscal year 2016. This is similar to the hearing we had last year on the FCC's budget request, and I believe fully as the Oversight Committee we need to always take this action. This year is a request for $530 million in spending authority that, if approved, would be the highest spending authority in the history of the agency. When the FCC was last formally reauthorized in 1990, its appropriated budget was a little shy of $117 million. Much has changed since that last reauthorization of the Commission. The industries and markets, certainly, that the Commission oversees have, without question, undergone dramatic changes and continued to evolve at a rapid pace. But in the intervening years, the FCC has struggled to reflect the evolution of technology that's brought about the integration of voice, video, and data services and the significant shifts in consumer consumption patterns that have resulted. On the contrary, because it's structured in much the same way as its governing legislation, the Communications Act of 1934, the agency continues to reflect a regulatory scheme predicated on separate titles for specific network technologies and services. Now, this siloed scheme is out of touch with the convergence of technologies in the modern digital era and deserves reform. Nowhere is the Communication Act's failure of imagination more evident than in the FCC's decision to reclassify broadband service under rules developed to regulate the telegraph's heyday. By restructuring a regulatory scheme that had been going the way of the single-use copper line telephone network it was intended to govern, three FCC commissioners repudiated years of light-touch regulation of the Internet under both Republican and Democratic administrations. Now, while this is something some of us have differing opinions on this subcommittee, our purpose today is not to delve into the issues of net neutrality, but rather to get into the issues of the way the agency has operated and the budget they've proposed. The FCC has requested an increase in its budget to $505 million, including $388 million in budget authority from regulatory fee collections and $117 million from auction funds. That's an increase of $59 million from the FY 2015 appropriation. Specific items noted in the request includes the usual pay raises for personnel, but also includes funds for the implementation of the Public Safety Answering Points Do Not Call Registry, as required by the Middle Class Tax Relief and Job Creation Act of 2012, $3 million in costs for the National Broadband Map, and the FCC inherited, that the FCC inherited from NTIA when it ran out of stimulus funds to pay for it. A $5.8 million increase in recurring and $11.7 million one-time increase in IT costs, $51 million additional funds as the agency prepares to move or restack as their building lease expiration date approaches. One component of the request that resonates in particular and is in addition to the $59 million increase in funding is a request for a $25 million transfer from the Universal Service Fund to pay for the FCC's costs related to administration of the fund, raising the total increase to $84 million. In the past, Congress funded the FCC's Office of Inspector General with a transfer of USF funds for the purpose of bolstering audits and investigations to address waste, fraud, and abuse in the fund following a GAO report. And those funds have been expended by the Office of Inspector General over the last several years. The request for $25 million is not for audits and investigations by the Office of Inspector General, which, based on our last hearing, appears to have a rocky relationship with the Chairman's office, but to reimburse the Commission for costs of performing the core function of implementing Section 254 of the Communications Act. This is a disturbing proposal, I would tell you from my perspective. Mr. Wilkins states in his testimony that recovering these costs from the fund will relieve the burden on companies with no relationship to USF that pay fees to the Commission. However, this realignment, as it's called, would create a separate funding stream for the agency that comes directly out of the pockets of consumers to implement and support a subsidy program, the size of which is determined by the FCC, and that has become so large and burdensome it appears that it has outgrown the FCC's capacity for adequate oversight. It's even more disturbing when we recognize the fact the Universal Service Administrative company, USAC, an independent organization designated to manage the fund, already draws in excess of $100 million a year from the fund for its administration and oversight, and the FCC's Office of Inspector General dedicates a portion of its funding to USF audits and investigations. According to its last report, USAC had 356 employees and a cost of $41.6 million. We have more work to do, obviously. We welcome you here, and I've used up the balance of my time. I now recognize my friend and colleague from California, Ms. Eshoo. Designated to manage the fund already draws in excess of $100 million a year from the fund for its administration and oversight, and the FCC's Office of Inspector General dedicates a portion of its funding to USF audits and investigations. According to its last report, USAC had 356 employees and a cost of $41.6 million. We have more work to do, obviously. We welcome you here, and I've used up the balance of my time. I now recognize my friend and colleague from California, Ms. Eshoo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to you and to the members and to Mr. Wilkins. Welcome. Today's topic is an important one, the FCC's budget, and we again welcome you back to the subcommittee, Mr. Wilkins. I noticed that we have some very young people in the audience, and it occurred to me, I wonder if they know what we're talking about, if they're going to get this. So let's see if we can't keep it at a elemental level so that you understand what the committee is doing and why we're here today. It is very important because we're reviewing the proposed budget for a very important agency, the Federal Communications Commission. I think the questions that I would like to see addressed anyway, because I think that they're a very high import, are the following. And that is, will the agency have the necessary staff to carry out the world's first voluntary incentive spectrum auction, along with the IP transition, the review of pending mergers, and USF reform? These are all top-line priorities, not only for the agency, but for this committee that has really shaped those policies that are carried out by the FCC. So I want to make sure that you have the resources to do that. Will the agency be able to upgrade its IT infrastructure so that public comments on issues that are important to the American people can be filed without crashing your website? We saw what happened last year when there were over 4 million people that weighed in, voicing their support for enforceable net neutrality rules, and I'd like to hear about that. What plan do you have, and what's built into your budget to handle that? Will the agency remain on track to move its headquarters within the next 2 years? It's my understanding that by reducing the agency's footprint, that it's estimated that approximately $119 million of taxpayer dollars would be saved over 15 years. Now, that may not be the biggest number in the federal government, but I think anyone that's in the room would welcome having $119 million in their checking account over the next 15 years. Finally, will the FCC be able to develop and implement, and I think the chairman raised this, a do not call registry for telephone numbers used by 911 call centers? This is, again, another high priority of ours. Certainly it's been mine going back to the 90s. This provision was included in the Public Safety and Spectrum Act that we wrote in this committee in 2012 to ensure that automatic dialing or robocall equipment does not tie up public safety lines and unnecessarily divert critical emergency resources. So I don't think these are small questions. They're important ones, and they track on a parallel track what the subcommittee's priorities and legislation has been, and especially when the agency, and this is my understanding, you can confirm it or deny it, that the agency is employing today the lowest number of full-time staff in 30 years. The agency has to have the tools and the resources to fulfill its mission, which means more successful spectrum auctions like the nearly $45 billion. We're so proud of that. We really are very proud of that. That was raised earlier this year. So whether it's protecting the public interest, promoting competition, enhancing innovation, these are all at the core of the mission of the FCC. And we look forward to hearing your testimony. Thank you for your service, and look forward to your directing answers to us on the questions that I posed. And with that, I yield back. Thank you, Mr.
Gentlelady
Chairman.
yields back the balance of time. The chairman recognizes the gentleman from.
Something, Mr. Chairman. Can I ask for unanimous consent to submit a letter for the record from Consumers Union? It regards the importance of the FCC's IT modernization for American consumers.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Now we recognize the gentleman from Ohio, the Vice Chair of the Subcommittee on Communications and Technology, Mr. Latta, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Wilkins, thanks for being with us today. Oversight of the FCC serves as a critical function in maintaining accountability and transparency at the agency. Given the FCC's integral role in the information and communications technology marketplace, we have a responsibility to ensure that the processes at the Commission are not wasteful and reflect a capability to handle such significant parts of our nation's economy. With that said, today's hearing represents a valuable opportunity to examine the Commission's budget management and spending practices. Additionally, it is important for us to gain a better understanding of the challenges facing the agencies that contribute to limiting the efficiency of its operations. As a representative, I take great responsibility in ensuring that taxpayer dollars are spent wisely and effectively. I look forward to discussing how Congress can work with the Commission to ensure the advancement of the communications and technology economy in a fiscally responsible manner. And, Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of time. Chair recognizes the ranking member of the full committee, the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Pallone, for 5 minutes.
I want to thank the chairman and our ranking member, Eshoo, for having this hearing, and welcome Managing Director Wilkins. We're here today to take a look at the Federal Communications Commission's fiscal year 2016 budget estimates. The FCC has broad jurisdiction. It oversees industries that account for approximately 1/6 of the economy and growing, but it also has been operating with the same budget for the better part of a decade now, and that does not account for the damage done by the sequester. So I should note that the FCC operates with fewer than 1,700 full-time employees, and I would say that that is certainly a small but efficient agency. This year, the FCC asked for a $48 million increase in its budget authority over last year. The vast majority of that increase would pay to move the Commission's headquarters to a new home. Overall, the move would create a smaller footprint for the agency, which will save $119 million over the next 15 years. Most of the remaining increase is to upgrade the Commission's aging and creaky information technology infrastructure, which Ms. Eshoo mentioned, and that's an update that will net a savings of up to $10 million over the next 5 years. This is the same computer system that famously groaned to a halt under the weight of 4 million Americans writing in to voice their opinions about network neutrality, and 4 million is certainly an eye-popping number when it comes to comments in a single proceeding. Modern computers, however, should be able to handle that load without blinking. Now, together, these temporary budget increases will save the government nearly $130 million in the long run. Rejecting these requests out of hand would be penny-wise but pound-foolish. Unfortunately, this subcommittee is practiced at reviewing these types of budget requests. Today's hearing is actually different than other FCC budget hearings for a couple of reasons. First, it's the start of an effort to revive an FCC reauthorization process that has been dormant for 25 years. With the struggle Republicans have been facing to find the department, or I should say to fund the Department of Homeland Security, however, I doubt the public wants us to create a brand new funding cliff. Second, the timing of today's budget hearing has raised some eyebrows, coming just days after the Commission adopted a new network neutrality protections. And now that might be a coincidence, and I'm hopeful it is, because I think we should all agree that this committee has a responsibility to conduct a genuine oversight. We must make sure the FCC's dollars go as far as possible, but we should also ask whether the Commission has sufficient funding to maintain its critical services for the public. And together, it's our job to make sure that we strike the right balance. And I guess there's nobody else, so I'll yield the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. And as I said in my opening statement, this is an annual process authorizing committees are supposed to go through to review budgets. So that's why we're here today. And Mr. Wilkins, we're delighted you could join us today as the Managing Director for the Federal Communications Commission, a big duty, and we welcome your testimony and the work you do down there. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman Walden, Ranking Member Eshoo, members of the subcommittee. I do appreciate the chance to be here today to talk to you about our budget request. I submitted my written testimony. What I thought I would use my introductory time for is just to say a few words about each of the 4 slides that I submitted because they provide some good context for our budget. First slide. So just taking the historical perspective, the FCC does have a 2+ decades record of being a very good fiscal steward for the U.S. government. So the left-hand side of the chart shows that we are now closing in on $100 billion of revenue raised for the Treasury since 1994, overwhelmingly from our auctions proceeds. Over that same time frame, we've spent less than $8 billion on agency operations. So for the U.S. Treasury, that means that 8 cents spent on the FCC generates $1. And of course, even that 8 cents doesn't come from general revenues. It comes either from retained auction proceeds for a very tiny portion of those auction revenues or from our Section 9 reg fees. Now, our budget request for 16 is significant, and exactly as you said, Chairman Walden, is for $84 million. I just want to make 3 points about that request. The first one is that the lion's share of that request, 71%, is from a management standpoint, these are unavoidable costs. These are not costs that management is, for example, seeking as a new initiative. The bulk of it is for the move. Our current lease expires in October 2017, and we do have to spend some money to reap the long-term benefits of lower lease costs. We are requesting $21 million for IT. The bulk of that is to finish the job that we started to truly transform and modernize our IT infrastructure. It's by far our most important management initiative. It'll bring benefits in costs, in efficiency, and in operations. And then the third point, these are the only things we're requesting more funds for. In the last several years, we'd asked for more money for more people, for example. We are not doing that. We heard the message, and in fact, over the last year, we've had a chance to look at our workforce. We think we can do the job with the people we have if we can upgrade the IT. So it is a big request, but it is really just for these things. Now, to put that budget request in context, so the last 6 fiscal years on the left-hand side, the FCC has been essentially flat. So our auctions funds was at $85 million for 9 years. It has gone up 2 of the last 3 years, specifically for the incentive auctions. We appreciate that, and that work is going well. In our non-auctions area, though, we have been actually flat in nominal terms. We had a very small increase from 11 to 12 that was more than offset by sequestration. And in real terms, our purchasing power has gone down. So we are mainly a people-centered agency. Federal pay increase alone increases our cost by a couple $1 million a year. Our rent goes up a little bit every year. So just to put that in context, fiscal 15, our flat budget was paired up against almost $7 million of increased costs just for our people and our rent and other contracts. That's about 40 to 50 people. In a given year, the FCC loses about 100, 120 people just to retirement and other attrition. So what the flat line really means is that for every 2 people that leave the commission right now, we can only replace 1. And the right-hand side shows the results of that. As Member Eshoo said, our staffing is at its lowest again in 15, and our current management plan is for it to go even lower in 2016, more than 100 lower than 6 years ago, and more than 200 lower from the 20-year average. Finally, IT, we think, really is the solution to this. There is no question that we can use IT to do our work more efficiently, more transparently, and to support all the things that Congress wants us to do. Over the last year, we have put in place a very strong plan. We've actually started to move it down the field. 3 main areas: infrastructure costs. As of today, we still have over 200 very expensive large servers sitting in very expensive downtown real estate being serviced by very expensive direct contractors. Using some reprogramming money we got last year, we've just finalized a contract to move those to an off-site facility. It's the first step in moving to a truly low-cost, secure, cloud-efficient environment. When you do that, you can improve the way you work with data. So at the FCC, we have over 100,000 data objects, including multiple definitions of the same basic thing that to a business person seems ridiculous. 40 terabytes of data, very expensive. When we have the infrastructure upgraded, we can then essentially put all that data into a similar shared environment that we can use much more efficiently. And that then gets to the third piece, the mission systems. That's where we really save the most money. We right now do most of our software development on kind of a custom model. Everything is it's a custom renovation, if you will. We want to get to a world where it's IKEA. You just have the pieces. It's pretty easy to build. When the infrastructure and the data are modernized, we think we can cut our development costs by 50 to 75% and the times to be shorter. So this is the thing that from a management perspective, we just want to plant our flag. We want to be able to do this, and it will allow us to do a lot of things more efficiently and better to do what Congress needs us to do. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you again.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate the leadership you've given. I want to go back to this ratio, the 13 times, because $79 billion of that actually is from 3 auctions.
True.
Correct. So it is. You're not going to sit here and guarantee me that you're going to return 13 times investment every year, year in and year out. It's really pretty lumpy in there.
It is lumpy. The average, actually, until the ADBOS 3, until the most recent ADBOS 3 auction, the average is around $2.2 billion a year. Actually, when you add in $45 billion, that goes up quite a bit.
Yeah,
it will be lumpy. That's the nature of auctions.
Yeah.
But over the long, on the long
But the commission itself is not generating 13 times investment year in and year out.
certainly depends on auction proceeds.
There you go. I believe you're aware that the committee sent an oversight request to the commission on February 18th asking for a set of information related to the commission's regulatory and administrative processes. That request was signed by me and Chairman Upton and Chairman Murphy, motivated by concern with a variety of lapses that we perceive in the way the commission has been conducting its regulatory and administrative business. As you are maybe aware, the due date for that production of that information was today. And I was distressed to be informed by my staff a little while ago that apparently is not going to be available today, which we had hoped. I don't know how much you've been involved in that matter, but I hope you'll convey the following message to the chairman's office that we understand the commission and staff's very busy. We do not intend to impose meaningless or trivial obligations, but we do take seriously our oversight responsibility. With respect to this specific request, I would strongly recommend the chairman's staff make available every effort to comply with our information request by today's deadline. Based on the rigor of the response, we will make every effort to work with the chairman and his staff to be fair and reasonable. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I absolutely will convey that back to the chairman's staff, and I'm back at the commission later.
So there have been some issues come up lately I wanted to ask you about, given your expansive role there. Does the FCC have policies or rules regarding staff use of social media, such as Twitter, in their capacity as employees of the commission? And do these policies or rules prescribe a record-keeping and retention policy for those communications?
So any use of personal, whether it's email or social media, certainly is subject to General Federal Records Act requirements, including the schedules that we have in place. Those rules, as you know, certainly do require, if you are doing things that are official government business in those environments, it is the responsibility of the employee to bring them back into our records environment.
All right. Recently, it was reported that a senior member of the Greenhill and Company had left his position and joined the commission as a volunteer. I got a couple of questions here. Could you describe what he will be doing? Didn't the commission contract with Greenhill to perform work related to the auction? I'd like to know about that contract. Was it competitively bid? Was Greenhill the lowest cost bidder? When was it awarded? The basic sort of oversight that we need to do here. What can you tell me about this issue involving Greenhill Company?
So let me follow up on the exact details of that contract. Greenhill, as you know, it's an investment firm that we contracted with to do estimates of the value of broadcast licenses for the Spectrum auction as part of that process. Right. The results of their work has been shared with quite a few broadcasters around the country. I think we found it very valuable. In terms of that individual, we will follow up with you on the details.
Yeah, we'll have more questions on that for the record, but the extent to which you can follow up. And we're trying to get this information back because, the week after, when we return, after next week, we will have all 5 commissioners here. And so it would be, I think, helpful for that hearing if we had some of this information. And so we'll follow up with more of the questions related to Greenhill. So let me move on to the USF issue because that's one that has obviously gotten our attention. It appears that a little less than half the $25 million in the Universal Service Fund is going to the Wireline Competition Bureau. Is that accurate?
Yes.
And is any of that money going to the Wireline Competition Bureau?
Yes.
And for what purpose and what kind of USF work does WCB do?
So WCB, of course, are the program owners of each of the four main universal service programs, everything from policy development to administration of policies, so everything from rules to appeals, sort of all of the day-to-day operations of the program in the legal sense.
And is any of that money going to the International Bureau? And if so, for what purpose and what kind of work do they do?
No, that should not go to the International Bureau unless I'm missing in some small detail, but no.
All right.
Definitely intended to focus on activities related to USF.
And is any of that money going to the Office of Legislation Affairs? There are other bureaus and offices that are slated to get some of this money, correct?
No, so the way, and I'll, just more broadly, we developed that $25 million figure based on the amount of activities related to USF across the commission, and it is all activities. It is not just audits, for example. A very small portion of that, if there was leg affairs work related to USF communications with Congress, for example, I think we would include that. The idea was to fully capture the costs related to USF work.
All right. I've got a couple of other issues for the record that I'll add to that, but my time's expired. And again, I thank you for your testimony and the good work you do. And now I'd recognize the gentlelady from California, Ms. Eshoo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you again for having this hearing. It's always an important one, and our oversight is just essential. It's one of the major responsibilities that we have in the Congress. And Mr. Wilkins, you're a terrific testifier.
Thank you.
You were brief in your opening statement. You didn't have to read anything. You're smart. You know the agency, and it's very helpful to us because you give very direct answers. You testified that the FCC plans a net reduction of 37 full-time employees for fiscal year 2016. We know that agencies can essentially cook the books by reducing the number of full-time employees, but then hire them back as contractors. Is that anywhere near the case with the agency? Can we just dispense of this as something that is not going to take place? Can you assure us that it's
Yes,
not going to?
absolutely.
Well, that's good news. I want to congratulate the agency on its recent efforts to crack down on consumer billing fraud. Just last week, the FCC announced a $9 million fine against a company that was illegally billing consumers and switching their telephone company without the consent of the consumers. It makes me really wonder why people will do what they do and I guess they think they can get away with it, but it's an important function of the FCC. So specifically, how does your budget request help the FCC continue this important consumer protection work? Where is that buried in the budget, and do you know how much it is?
Well, the Enforcement Bureau is around 240 people right now. But we are not projecting staff increases for any bureau, including the Enforcement Bureau. I think the Enforcement Bureau actually is a great example, though, of how our IT actually can enable more effective use of the people that we have. And it actually relates to process reform. Process reform in my office is an internal support exercise. Interestingly, the Enforcement Bureau is the first large bureau at the Commission that has what I would call a real tracking system of how they do work. That was put in place in 2012. We have a new bureau chief there who I can tell you is very aggressively using that sort of metrics to make sure he's deploying his staff on the most important areas, such as the ones that you mentioned. So the way we think about it is we don't need to add dozens of people to any given bureau to deliver those results. We think we've got very good people. We just want to use them more efficiently, and we see a lot of opportunities for the IT work
Great.
we're doing to do that.
On the whole issue of IT, I think the chairman raised this. You mentioned it in your opening statement. My experience in Congress, both in on this committee and as a member of the Intelligence Committee, is that the government is really lousy when it comes to procurement of IT. People don't know what they're buying. And I mean, you can have a GS-14, and they may know the agency really well, but they really don't know what they're buying. People can sell them just about anything. A lot of taxpayer dollars wasted. My question to you is, and you started to mention a part of this, is what you plan to purchase relative to the IT system to make it robust and 21st century and effective and all of that. Is this being built for you, or is it off the shelf?
Right. Off the shelf.
great. That's the best answer you could have given me. I don't have to, nothing to pursue there. That was just what I wanted to hear. On the AWS 3 auction and the nearly $45 billion that it raised, we were very specific about where those dollars were to be applied. What I'd like to know is when will these funds be available for obligation?
Okay. So we have over $40 billion in our FCC account at Treasury at the close of the auction. There is the usual post-auction, any disputes, all issues have to be resolved. The licenses then can be issued by the Wireless Bureau, and then the money can flow to.
So when do you think that money will be obligated?
Congressman, I can't give you an estimate. All I can say is we are working on it as fast as we can. We know.
But I mean, do you think it's going to be in a year or 6 months or just some ballpark?
I think that the ballpark, it's within a year. But in this case, obviously, it's a very high-dollar auction, lots of questions. All I
Right.
can say is we'll move as quickly as we can.
Okay. There's been a lot of attention given to the need for enhanced location accuracy when calling 911, from a wireless phone. We've, many landline phones in large office buildings still only provide the building's address. Where is the FCC on this? If you had to make a 911 call from
Internally.
tell me how it would work.
So
Is it going to work, or
Yes.
is it in the works that it's going to work, or?
if 911 is called within our facilities, we can identify where in the building the call came from. That's an issue in and of itself. Is it 8th floor, 5th floor, wherever? So we have a process where our security team knows when the call goes out, it goes through to first responders, but then we also.
Well, I know what the process is with first responders and all that, but, yeah, exactly. You dial 911, but I want to know what happens after that. Does the first responders, do they have the granular location information?
our
Do callers need to dial an extra 9 before the 911?
Our system, we do dial the extra 9, so we are 911.
Are you going to
Surveyed
fix
a lot of
that?
agencies.
You're going to get rid of the 9?
There are mixed practices out there. And then in terms of location, our security team knows where the building the call came from, both tells responders and then also delivers our folks there.
Yeah, well, you're really not behind the 8 ball on this. That really needs to be upgraded. And especially that it's the FCC. You should be the example, not only for the rest of the federal government, but for the entire country. So you need to work on that. My time is up, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
You're
Thank you,
welcome.
Mr. Wilkins.
Thank you, Mr. Wilkins. We'll now turn to the Vice Chair of the subcommittee, Mr. Latta.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, Mr. Wilkins, thanks very much for being here, and thanks for your testimony. The Inspector General is required to conduct audits of the Commission's financial statements. Did the IG audit the Commission's FY 2014 financial statements?
Yes.
Did the audit report any material weakness with regard to the Universal Service Fund?
Yes.
Could you describe what those weaknesses were or are?
Yes, it was a specific material weakness that related to the way USAC, or the Universal Service Administrative Company, reconciled its invoice amount against obligated funds. It's specifically related to they extended the invoice deadlines in a particular year, and their systems didn't automatically report back to their obligation system. They actually found the problem. We were aware of it before the auditors came in. Of course, we told the auditors. So the auditors quite appropriately said this is a problem to fix, but no money was lost. It actually was a management step that was identified.
So there was no impact on any monies out there?
No money was lost.
Okay, and did you say, has this weakness been corrected and identified?
Yes.
Okay. And how far back did that go?
That was just for 1 year because they changed the invoice system for 1 year.
Okay. And also, I guess, to follow up on that, is this the same issue that we discussed during your last visit here? And is it associated with any new financial system?
No, that's our FCC Genesis system. This issue you're raising was at USAC, which is a separate financial system.
And who was the contractor?
For our system,
Right.
a company called CGI.
CGI. Okay, thank you. And again, in fiscal year 2016 budget request, it states that the Commission is in the process of creating a joint USF anti-fraud task force to combine resources agency-wide. And I appreciate the effort for a more targeted approach to identify and prevent fraudulent activities within the USF. However, the agency has requested $10 million for anti-fraud efforts within the USF. How was this amount determined for the $10 million?
Right. So We think that the need to have that joint effort is very important. What we are doing, though, is redeploying resources we have to staff it, whereas a year ago, we said, actually give us more money to hire more people. And I think it's an example of a year in there as the senior management team looking very hard at the people we have and where we can be more efficient. We said, let's use the FTEs we had to do this work instead of asking for more.
Okay. And could you give a specific breakdown of that cost for that $10 million?
Yeah, in 2015, we requested $10.8 million for 45 FTEs. I believe the breakdown was 17 for the Enforcement Bureau, I want to say 20 for the Wireline Competition Bureau, another 10 for my office, and the rest for the IG, I believe. I might be off by 1 or 2, but that was the rough breakdown. We're not going to have that high of a staffing level. So, for example, instead of those 17 for the Enforcement Bureau, right now that USF enforcement component of the Enforcement Bureau is 5 people, and those are roles that we've filled as people have left. So the group will not be as big, but as we have the opportunity to reallocate resources we have, we think we will staff that up because we're seeing lots of benefits from what we're doing.
Okay. Well, and additionally, how much of the money is expected to be recovered through tactics of the task force and other anti-fraud measures?
Well, certainly, and I think the IG would agree with this too, a dollar of enforcement or oversight in USF tends to generate positive, more than a dollar of returns, from those activities. Certainly our reason for creating that effort is because Universal Service, all of those programs have been going through lots of change over the last 2 or 3 years, essentially around modernizing them for broadband. When you do that, the rules change. Simple compliance can be harder for people to participate in them because the rules are different. Obviously, USF, and sometimes you have criminal or fraud issues, but frankly, compliance with the rules is an important issue for us. If our rules say if you don't comply with them, you shouldn't get the money. And that's the kind of thing that we're really focusing on internally, is making sure that there's compliance as the rules change so that money goes where it should go.
Okay. And the commission is also, as mentioned earlier, is requesting over $44 million to move to new headquarters or for restacking. The budget request states that by moving or restacking the FCC headquarters, this process would save the commission up to $119 million over 15 years. Can you explain how the commission reached that estimate of the $119 million over the timeline of 15 years?
Yep. So our current fully loaded lease cost for main headquarters is around $41 million. The space planning that we're doing already with GSA, essentially to bring us, I would say, just in line with current federal guidelines, would be reducing that space by around 30%. And I think GSA, obviously we are customers of GSA in this process. They would also propose probably a lower per square foot. So essentially the idea would be for our lease costs to go down by 11 to 12 million a year. Over 15 years, you deduct from that, though, for example, the $51 million we're requesting now is to facilitate that move, and the net would be $119 million over the 15 years.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and my time has expired, and I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. Now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Pallone, for questions.
Thank you. Mr. Wilkins, Ms. Eshoo was talking about this issue, but I wanted to follow up. I'm very concerned about consumers being hit with fraudulent charges on their monthly communication bills through scams like cramming. And the FCC has made strides over the past year trying to curb this practice. But the question is, if the FCC's budget continues to flatline the way it has since 2009, will it impact the FCC's ability to protect consumers from fraud?
Yeah. If we continue to be flatlined, it will impact our ability to deliver all areas of our mission. I think our current budget proposal that we can make do with fewer people is based on having much better IT to use those people much more efficiently. And in the consumer enforcement area you're describing, for example, there's a huge opportunity to use data and analytics, using IT to be much smarter about finding areas that we then go focus the resources we have instead of just perhaps waiting for someone to complain. So that's the opportunity we see, but it does require the investment. If we are flatlined, there's no way we can make the investments nearly as promptly as we want to. And I would actually add, if we are flatlined for 16 in the sense of not being able to fund those move costs, that money's going to come from somewhere. I mean, our lease after 2017 goes up by $9 million a year if nothing else changes. Someone has to pay that. I mean, there really is a kind of a downward spiral around this move that, everything else aside, really would affect our ability to fund anything at a reasonable level.
Okay. I think you've answered in your response the other two questions I have, but let me just look at this a second. With regard, you talked about the aging computer system that I guess will eventually slow down your ability to continue these reform efforts. I think you've answered that in terms of, what happened if you don't, because that's where the bulk of this additional money goes to, correct?
I think right now our cost profile for IT continues to grow because the cost of maintaining things that are older and older grows every year. In September, when I was here in September, I testified that over half our systems are more than 10 years old in terms of software. And in the software world, that might as well be 100 years, right? The cost to do a software update for something that was installed in 2004 is astronomical because almost no one else does it. And so it's really that treadmill. If you don't invest to get off the treadmill, it just goes faster and faster, and you run faster and faster. You don't get anywhere, and you're just spending more money to essentially, deliver the same or worse.
And I think you talked about the staff, too, that the FCC has a historically low number of full-time staff, and whether any further reduction in the number of full-time staff would impact your ability to carry out your responsibilities. I think you kind of answered that, too, but if you want to add anything.
We think with sufficient IT support, the staffing level we propose in 16 lets us do everything Congress needs us to do.
Okay. All right. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. The gentleman yields back, and the chair now recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Shimkus, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Wilkins. Welcome. It's good to have you back. Ranking Member Eshoo talked about the 911 issue, but Commissioner O'Reilly in a blog post said that it's a simple programming change. And the first question, and this is for obviously the facility which you're operating out of, is that your understanding? And did you give him that information as far as the headquarters itself?
Yes. So it would be a programming change for our voice over IP phone system. It would cost some money. Depends on if we just did it for our main headquarters facility or went to all of our remote locations. Actually hearing the committee's interest and concern in that, I'd be very glad to go back and talk again with my IT team and see what else we can do. I will say that having looked at it, the one question that we have from management is, the people that use our phones are our internal people. We don't have members of the public back in our offices. And at some level, they're used to dialing 9 to get out. And so we've been a little
Yeah,
bit,
I guess I would only say that you may have guests. Obviously, a lot of people who are outsiders come into the FCC to have meetings. You may bring your kid to work day. It's just, and these are really terrible stories that
we'll be very glad to go back and look at it.
And really, government should try to lead as much as possible in doing this. And if it's a simple programming, then we can tell other entities that, hey, it's a simple programming issue, and it may cost a little bit, but the return on investment over time, just for you all leading by example, could be very helpful.
Okay.
I'd like to then go to a question on last time we had talked about talking about the internal reporting processes for auction-related expenditures and reviewing the use of auction funds and ITs. Have you completed this review?
Yes, and so I think either my QFRs or one of our document requests to this committee last year, we specifically broke out. So as I said, wherever we can, we do direct accounting. So a person who works on auctions, they literally do their time code and say, I worked on auctions. And wherever we can, we do that. An IT contract that is for the new auctions platform obviously goes to auctions. Around $55 million of our current auction spending is directly accounted for.
So can you provide that stuff to us?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. We will.
And the other follow-up, you're providing an audit of these responses and reviews on the accuracy? Are you?
We're certainly doing ongoing review to make sure those costs are accurately reflected.
And can you provide us some of the ongoing reviews? And
sure. We'll be glad to provide all the information.
And I'm sorry, I'm going fast. I want to get to the last one. You're also requesting $3 million for the ongoing maintenance improvement costs for the broadband map. As many of us know on the subcommittee who've been here for a while, NTI funded the MAP through Recovery Act funds or stimulus funds. That's correct. Those funds were exhausted, so last year FCC became responsible for its cost. So we're trying to figure out how that happened. How did we go from NTIA, an agency of the Department of Commerce, now where the FCC kind of took control of this? And then we're trying to, the other question is, who made that decision?
So, as you said, NTIA got the funding in the Recovery Act, set up because the FCC has expertise in it. A lot of our processes obviously involve collecting broadband data. NTIA set up an interagency contract to fund us to actually do the IT systems, and that was the practice until their funding went away. So the idea of transferring it to us, I wouldn't say it was like a preordained, it transferred to the FCC. It's more of de facto, we run it, they can't fund it anymore. We have found it to be a valuable policy tool, and we would like to keep funding it, but as you said, it was not funded last year, and right now it is on hold. I mean, we're actually not investing money to keep upgrading it or operating it in any kind of real way.
But it didn't rise to the level of, the commission actually making a decision or the chairman saying, we're going to do this. Was this done just internally, kind of by default?
Right. It was
You got handed the ball and you're
yeah, it
holding
was it was the kind of thing where agencies, can collaborate on. NTIA had some money, we had some expertise. We did the arrangement to set it up that way, and it worked pretty well while they had the funding, and now we have to figure out if we want to maintain it, where the funding comes from.
Chairman, my time's over. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Wilkins.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Clark, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank our ranking member. I thank Mr. Wilkins for coming today to share his information with us. I'm a new member to this committee and wanted to just ask a couple of questions. One is somewhat parochial. I was visited by my local regional broadcasters just recently, and they raised a concern about regional office staffing, particularly in the New York region, some concerns about radio piracy. And I was wondering whether you have considered looking at these regional offices and the staffing levels and the concerns that these regions have, whether you would be addressing that in this budget, and whether there's a line item specific to those regional offices.
Thank you for that question. So one of the activities we are now undertaking, with our most recent budget being less than we asked for, is a systematic review of all of our people, all of our offices, to find out how we can most efficiently deploy with the resources we have. So we are actively looking at that. It's not a line item in our budget necessarily, but we are definitely looking at staffing levels in offices like New York and trying to make sure we're making the best use of the people and the money that we have.
Just wondering, do you look at perhaps activities nationally and then look at allocation of staff based on, you may have a larger problem, say, in a place like New York.
Sure.
Than you may have in other parts of the country, whether it is appropriate to shift staff according to need?
Yeah, I would agree. So the only way that we can, especially in that field part of the FCC, the only way we can manage is to find out where is the highest density of need and how can we deploy the people and the resources we have against that. So that is absolutely the principle that we're using as we're doing this review right now.
Very well. Immediately upon taking office, Chairman Wheeler identified FCC process reform as a priority. An intra-agency staff working group produced a report on the FCC process reform. What progress has been made to implement the recommendations in that report? And could you please explain what other steps the Commission has taken to improve the FCC's process?
Thank you for that question. That is a very important priority for the chairman. My office is responsible for what I would describe as the internal process reform steps. There's a separate set of issues around how the commissioners operate that my office doesn't really play a role in. I'll give you a couple of examples. There are a lot of things in the internal process reform report around improving transparency and using metrics to better manage our internal resources. One thing that we just completed with my office as the main implementer was a new system for consumers to register complaints with the commission. We have a new online system. It's a website. If you have a problem related to your phone bills or any other FCC issue, it's actually much easier for you as an individual to go and make that complaint. The process reform angle is we now have a much easier way to track those things, to figure out is the backlog or the volume going up or down in given areas, be more transparent about it, and manage our resources better. So that's one example. And I would just emphasize that the IT investments that we want to make here that we've talked about so far in the hearing are overwhelmingly about having that model be used in many other areas for process reform improvement. And that's why the chairman's on my back to make sure we get the IT right.
Very well. And as you know, FCC licenses pay the costs associated with the FCC's operations. It is therefore critical for the FCC to ensure that its regulatory fees are assessed in a fair and equitable fashion. Can you explain the FCC's efforts to ensure fairness in the regulatory fee structure?
Yes, and let me answer that with two examples. My office actually does the fee proceedings. We just completed one last year where we tried to make at least a few areas better. So, for example, we set a new de minimis standard where a very small business who under the old formula may have had to pay us a few $100s and frankly spend more money on lawyers and filing costs than the money, we just exempted them. So trying to make it just less of a burden. This also is the USF proposal in our current budget is specifically designed so that the parts of the industry that are involved in USF are the ones who would support those activities at the commission, and the ones who aren't involved in USF would not. Under our current model, I mean, a broadcaster is a good example. Broadcasters don't have anything to do with USF. Part of the reg fee a broadcaster pays does in our current model go to basically pay for our USF activities. And given that our costs will go up because of the move for a year or two, we just thought this was the exact right time to propose that alignment so that the people that pay fees, it's sort of paid for things that relate to their business or their activity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Now yield back.
The gentlelady yields back, and the chair now recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Lance, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to you, Mr. Wilkins. The FCC makes a one-time request of $51 million for a restacking, and is this similar to, for move or restacking? Are a move or restacking equivalent, and which of the two would be less costly?
Certainly. So we always use move or restacking because certainly our current landlord is eligible to bid to retain our lease. And so the restacking would be we would stay at the current facility but in smaller space. So we would collapse and literally restack the way the offices are laid out. And so I think it's important from the GSA perspective that we maintain as much competition for our lease as possible, so we always maintain that. The $51 million budget request certainly applies to either one of those, because really what that pays for, it pays for internal construction, walls, and these are not exciting things, but they are necessary things. So the furniture, and even if we restacked our current location, you change the footprint because you're going to smaller offices, et cetera. And we are committed to those. We are committed, and frankly, GSA is going to make sure we're committed to those lower lease costs in the long term, as we talked about.
Are these competitively bid, or to the lowest responsible bidder? Or?
Right. So the process so Congress has to first approve a prospectus that hopefully will be coming from OMB relatively soon, and then an RFP goes out to commercial lessors for the period of several months, and people look at our requirements, how much space, other things, and there's a competitive bidding process that GSA runs, and we try to get the best deal for the taxpayer.
Well, thank you. At your convenience, we'd appreciate if you would provide us with a list of the awardees. And
Certainly.
We appreciate that. Thank you. The budget requests includes $2.4 million to engage an administrator to manage the Broadcast Relocation Fund.
Mm-hmm.
Is this going to be awarded through a competitive bidding
Yes.
process as well?
Yes.
Thank you. That ends my question. Anybody on our side wants the balance of my time?
I believe the gentleman yields back.
I'll yield back.
Thank you very much. And the chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York for 5 minutes, Mr. Collins.
Let's see if this is working. Yeah, it wasn't last week. Thank you, Mr. Wilkins. I'll begin one real quick question on the rural broadband map. I represent some very rural counties, and you currently use, if I understand, like the 9-digit zip code. In these counties, your 9-digit zip code is showing as much as 97% coverage. The counties know that was wrong. They did their own in-depth study. It's under 50%. So I'm assuming you're aware of the shortcomings in that. And is that what you're trying to address so we can actually get a number?
Right. Yeah. So the use of the broadband map is a tool exactly to facilitate that kind of input and two-way dialogue. Because you're right. In universal service, for example, we're deploying millions of dollars, and it really is supposed to be where it's most needed.
Where it's needed, which is our counties, and they're not getting it because of the 9-digit zip code
Exactly.
methodology.
Exactly. And so the broadband map has been used, and our hope is to use it as a tool to just make that easy. Because it's one thing to have some complicated data set to look at. It's another thing to see a map of your county, which you know,
Is wrong.
see what the FCC thinks is right or wrong, and if it's wrong, to be able to tell us.
I think all of us in this day and age would appreciate the more accurate you can get it, the funds can go where they actually are needed, which is many of the rural counties. So a couple of questions on the budget. That's what I've spent my life doing, both as a county executive in the largest upstate county in New York, where I implemented Lean Six Sigma for the first time in a large municipal government. We had over 5,000 employees. I cut 22% of the workforce, improved efficiency, improved delivery of service, and those cuts saved $100 million a year. So in budgeting, there's two ways of looking at it. Let's flatline and add to, and then there's zero-based. And first question, are you familiar with Lean Six Sigma? Have you looked at it? Because as a generality, you can reduce your workforce 22%.
Yes.
I did it, and actually improve service.
Yes. I am familiar with Six Sigma. I can tell you that in my budget discussion with Chairman Wheeler, he and I both are relatively new to the government from the private sector, and I am familiar with zero-based budgeting. Certainly, Chairman Wheeler's instructions to me are to find ways to be as efficient as possible. In the federal context, restructuring your workforce takes more time and energy because there are a number of constraints. And actually, what we are
Well, and I had a unionized workforce. Very
well, and
familiar
what
with
we're
that.
doing now, though, is consistent with those obligations that we have to follow. How can we most effectively restructure?
So would it make any sense, and I've done this, so to pick a department, to pick a unit that's got, I mean, you might even think some areas where efficiencies would be, and try, I'm assuming you've never really tried it. You've never brought in master black belts. You've never process mapped. Is that,
So we are doing some of that work now. I mean, we are, in some of our areas, we are doing,
but using the skill set of Lean Six Sigma, or is it just?
well, not Six Sigma specifically, but using tracking information we have and doing more of a zero-based exercise of what does it really take to do the work that's being done.
I'd love to see if you could provide me just some examples. That's my
Sure,
background.
Be glad to.
And perhaps even encourage you to consider, even on a satellite basis or some small basis, try it, and then it can catch on, and the savings can just be dramatic.
We agree.
It's not normally the way government works.
Agree.
So another comment, and I know I'm not going to try to trick you here, but you implied that because 8 cents in your budget brought in $1. You said that. Number one, I would say you're kind of taking undue credit for the wildly successful Spectrum audit that far exceeded your estimates. And so kind of a rhetorical question, if we increased your budget 10 million, could you guarantee us 120 million coming back in on top of your current budget? Or if I gave you 100 million, could you guarantee us 1.2 billion coming back?
I wouldn't want to say that. I would emphasize,
I didn't
though,
think
that
so.
when Spectrum auctions were created in the mid-'90s, I don't think anyone expected it would lead to the
Well, my point is, I understand how you did the numbers, but in fairness to us, I think you're trying to take credit for some things that were outside of your scope, and I know that's a good thing to do, but
Well, we do. Our auction staff does do that work. I mean, that money comes from somewhere. It's because there's an auction staff that runs those auctions.
so if we increased your budget by 10 million, could you give us another 120 million?
Well,
Coming
I think
back.
that the recent increases for our auction.
No, another, on top of your current budget.
Well, I think for auctions, the 11 million that we are requesting for our auctions fund probably will generate more than 100 million from the broadcast.
Oh, but if I gave you 10 on top of that, could you give us another one? So if we give you 20, can you give us 240?
No, clearly there's a limiting principle. To the
Okay,
availability.
well, I only bring that up because you were a little self-serving on that one.
Okay,
Okay.
that's fair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
Thank you very much. The chairman, or the gentleman yields back, and at this time, the chair recognizes the gentleman from North Dakota, Mr. Kramer, for 5 minutes.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Wilkins, for being here. Thank you for your, you're very knowledgeable, and it's great to have a witness that's both knowledgeable and forthcoming. I want to just follow up a little bit on where I think Mr. Lance was going, and maybe elaborate or expand it a little. And Ms. Eshoo as well. I appreciated your answer to her with regard to, contractors or former employees come back as contractors, and it was a good answer. But I am missing detail. I think when I look at the budget request, and I would just say it could be very helpful for us and give us a sense of confidence if we could get more details about not just the 44.1 million for the moving and stacking, which I think is a large amount, and I wish I had a local moving company to bid on it. But the 32 million in addition to that is pretty vague, to say the least. And I would just really want to encourage you, first of all, if you can explain it a little bit, but then provide us some detail again, before the chairman and the commission's visit here would be very
absolutely.
helpful.
Would you like me to, I can
Please,
say a little more?
yes, please.
So on the move costs, so it's 51 million that's just in our budget request is split as our usual practice between auctions and non-auctions.
Right.
51 million. That would be the first of 2 fiscal years where some of that spending is required. The total estimate we're getting from GSA is closer to about 80 million, so 50 million would be the larger chunk. Just to give you some context, for the amount of square feet that we're talking about for our new lease, that would be about $175 per square foot, fully loaded, for everything from walls and furniture to the cost to move the stuff. That compares to, let's see, GSA gave us 3 examples. NIH and NLRB both recently did moves that were at $206 a square foot, so we're a little lower than that. Recently, the FTC, which is sort of a similar agency to us in terms of people, moved about half as many people. It wasn't their full staff, it was a part of their staff, about 900 people. Total was $75 million over several fiscal years. Now, they had some different issues going on, but again, we're talking about similar amount of money for twice as many people. So I'm not an expert in, in move costs, but from what GSA has told us, the numbers are pretty much in the range that they would typically do with a federal agency. The rest of the cost, so exactly as the chairman said, total is 84 million. Take 51 away from that for the move. That leaves you with 33. We've got 4 million for the PSAP system and the broadband map. 8 million in inflation and 1 million for the IG. We could talk about any one of those, but those are those are what they are. Left with 21 million and left with 15 million if you take the PSAP and broadband map out. So those are, as Congresswoman Eshoo said, that's to buy the off-the-shelf IT infrastructure instead of having. I mean, we literally have 200 giant servers like you would see in a movie from 20 years ago. Sitting in very expensive real estate over here on 12th Street. I mean, that's not how you do IT, certainly in the private sector, and you shouldn't in the public sector now either. So we have literally a truck's going to show up to the FCC in a couple of weeks and take those suckers out to West Virginia. And that's the first step to going to a true cloud environment, which for storage and your basic servers is just the way to do it. So that's what those costs are, and we'll be glad to give staff follow-up on all of the specifics of those contracts.
It would be helpful just because obviously details are and information keeps the imagination from getting too far astray, if you know what I mean. I don't have anything else, but thank you. I yield back.
Thank you very much. The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Johnson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Wilkins, thank you for being here today. You've requested $25 million out of the USF fund to reimburse the agency for costs of oversight and administration of the fund, with $10 million of this amount going to the creation of the joint USF Anti-Fraud Task Force. Do you expect the fund for USF oversight administration to be a one-time disbursement, or do you expect this to be an ongoing effort?
Right. So we certainly would, if that was granted in 17, we would expect to resubmit it and it would be reapproved by Congress if it was approved.
Ongoing, am I understanding that?
Well, I really think it's obviously Congress's decision, and it is just about this issue of fee-ness to the fee payers. And to be clear, the money is the money, right? In other words, those are people that we largely have today. We may be reallocating some of our current workforce to that on the margin, but those are costs that are right now being paid by our fee payers, our Section 9 fees, they pay it. That's not going to change a lot.
What's that money going to be used for? The budget request says salaries and IT. Is it going to pay salaries,
No.
IT, or both?
No, the IT, that's a mistake if that's what it says. It is just for the salary and expenses for the people who do USF work at the commission.
Prior to this request, how did the agency fund these costs?
Out of our regular Section 9 reg fees.
Okay. The FCC acknowledges that it has collected just over $90 million in excess regulatory fees. So will the commission or the administration, as was called for in GAO's 2012 report to Congress titled Federal Communications Commission Regulatory Fee Process Needs to be Updated, will they provide Congress with a proposal to true up these fees so as to avoid continued growth of the uncollected funds?
Well,
or over-collected funds, I'm sorry.
It's, I mean, it certainly does strike us as a, as a burden on our fee payers. And I'd love to have the money, but that is sort of, it's outside the FCC's control. That's certainly something for the administration to work with Congress on what to do with those funds.
All right. As you also know, Mr. Wilkins, the FCC is well aware of the legal challenges ahead once the order is released. There may be reconsideration requests filed at the commission, motions for a stay of the order and appeals of the order that could go all the way to the Supreme Court. Has the FCC budgeted and estimated the potential resources needed and costs of the litigation for this year's budget request?
Mm-hmm. So with regard to the open internet issues, my office, I'm the budget, I'm the green eye shade guy, not the policy guy. I can tell you unequivocally, we do not have a current plan to add more resources to, say, the Wireline Competition Bureau or the General Counsel's office. I mean, this is certainly an important issue. It will take staff work. But in terms of my staffing discussions with those office and bureau heads, it's not different than, I would say, the usual large important issues that those staff support. So there's no increase in this budget, for example, to support that activity.
Okay. Litigating the Title II order will not be costless, though. Do you agree that's fair to say?
Certainly. I mean, yes.
Has the commission projected how much the cost will be for 2016, 17, 18, and 19? You may have just answered that. You haven't projected that out.
Our current budget assumes that the litigation support that we have in the General Counsel's office, for example, will be able to handle that. Now, if the office chiefs change their minds on that, they would bring it to me. But right now, that's our plan.
One final question, and if you would, please, for the sake of time, just a simple yes or no. Wouldn't the commission have saved a significant amount of money if it had let Congress legislate on net neutrality instead of moving forward with an ill-fated Title II order that it knows is going to be litigated for years?
No.
No. Why? Why do you say no? Cost of litigation, because you just said that it was going to be, the cost of litigation was not going to be negligible. So
our bureaus and offices that deal with those sorts of issues, essentially these are expert, experienced attorneys or economists or policy people, and this is their job. Any given year, we'll have major litigation, we'll have major issues. Those offices are built to do that.
But that litigation is not free. That litigation is not free. The taxpayers are paying for that litigation. So the answer is, the question is, wouldn't it have been more prudent to let Congress work with the FCC to get a legislative fix to net neutrality rather than spending taxpayer dollars to litigate something that they know is going to be litigated?
Well, Congressman, from my office's perspective, I can assure you there is no incremental budget requests that are being driven to support that. We have people who do that. Certainly there's a prioritization question.
But they don't do it for free. That's the point I'm making. They don't do it for free.
No,
if they weren't doing that, they would be doing other things that are meaningful and useful for the taxpayers, not litigating something that they could have precluded by working with Congress. Do you see what I'm saying?
Certainly the cost of the people to do that
Okay.
will be.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yields back, and the chair recognizes the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Pompeo, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Wilkins, you said in your testimony, quote, "You're currently examining additional workforce restructuring at all FCC facilities." Can you tell me if that includes studying closing field offices?
We are doing a thorough review of actually every part of the commission, and certainly the field, is part of that review, yes.
And have you, are you doing that internally, or do you have third parties that have assisted you in conducting that review?
So it's actually, as Mr. Collins from New York said, we have brought in some management experts to support our internal staff in doing that review.
Have they provided you with reports,
We've been
drafts, memos,
we do not
PowerPoint
have a
slides?
final report yet. We have a final report quite soon, actually, that we'd be glad to.
Do you have a draft report? Do you have interim reports? Do you have anything that you
They
can
have
share with
been
us?
sharing their analysis with us as we've been going along, and their final report is due actually next week.
Is there a recommendation to close field offices?
They have made us good recommendations for how we can look at the people we have, the real estate costs we have, and deliver the mission better.
Right, I asked a direct question. You gave a generic response. Is there a recommendation to close field offices for the FCC and relocate people to your headquarters?
In the interim analysis they've done, they have showed some cost-based ideas that could be consistent with that, but there's not a final recommendation yet.
And is this reflected, are these savings reflected in the budget that you've provided us?
No.
You said they could show some savings. You've seen the interim report. Did you assume, yep, we're going to go down that path and
Well-
the budget includes it?
No, so the answer is, as our 16 budget request does presume or does project that our staffing levels drop, we're going to look at every possible area we can to most efficiently affect that. The default is people retire or leave the commission and we just don't replace them. And we are certainly looking at other areas where we can, do other sorts of workforce changes. And absolutely not just in the Enforcement Bureau field and all across the commission. And that was the chairman's instruction to me when our budget came in where it did.
Sure. But my question is, what did you do? You had interim reports. What did you assume, and for purposes of your budget, did you assume there'd be changes in the lease payments in the field offices, locality pay connected to that? There are lots of changes. Changes in, you might have had engineers there, and you'd have lawyers here. Tell me what you assumed when you put this.
So our budget request, right, is for activities that will be taking more than, the better part of a year in advance when the budget is done. So when you're talking about that kind of a future view, all you can do is say, we will spend less money on categories such as FTEs. Then, as Congress considers that, we have to do our management plan and say, okay, how are we best going to make that happen? Will it be through changes to certain bureaus? Will it be through other savings? This type of analysis is certainly part of that process, but it was not a preordained, that's how we're going to pay for X. We just have to do the management work to find out where we save the money.
Right. It's just a bit disingenuous because it's not always the case that you just let folks go. Sometimes you let an engineer go and you bring a lawyer on, right? And so as we're thinking about how you do that, it's not just the case that you used attrition. You've now made policy and programming differences that I think are important for us to understand. And I guess what I'd ask you in closing is, when you get this report, it sounds like it'll be in the next couple days.
Yes.
When you get a copy of this report, will you make sure we get a copy as well?
As we decide on what to do with those recommendations and other work we're doing, we absolutely will share with.
Right, but even before you decide, can we just, when you get the report, you've clearly hired a contractor to do a report, and you already have documents from this contractor, right? They've provided you interim reports. May we get the interim reports?
We certainly will give you the final report. We want to make sure
Get the interim reports.
reports are.
That's a yes or no question. Can we just get the interim reports?
Well,
Wait, the
I
taxpayers
think
paid
we wouldn't
for it.
want to. We
We're
wouldn't want to
performing.
provide things that ultimately weren't what we relied on.
Sure you would. Sure, it's okay for us to see them. There's no harm in us in seeing them. You may make a different decision. Taxpayers paid for these. What's the harm in sharing them with the legislative branch?
Certainly, whatever we of course things that you request we'll provide.
Great, thank you. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back, and the chair recognizes the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Guthrie, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. You said replace an engineer with a lawyer. Aren't you both an engineer and a lawyer? So Mr. Pompeo has a good perspective.
Will you yield?
Not a practicing lawyer. I'll yield to you. I'm not a practicing lawyer. I have a Just a question on spectrum. I've gotten involved in with Ms. Matsui on the government spectrum. Hopefully free up more spectrum from auctions. So I just kind of tie into that, just some budget questions on that. And it's specifically the process of retaining auction revenues and how it works in practice. And I'm interested in what happens when the FCC is authorized to retain a certain amount to offset the cost of the auction administration in a certain year, but auctions in that particular year raise less than the threshold. I believe that this happened in 2008 to 12, where in no year did the FCC reach the $85 million threshold. So my question then, when the auction fails to raise more money than the FCC is permitted to retain, how is the difference made up to cover the expense of the auctions?
Right. So I don't have the specifics on the year you mentioned. We'll be glad to provide anything additional. The general process is
Yeah, the general process I'm interested in.
obviously, so Congress sets our cap of revenues we're allowed to use, and then there's a sort of a separate process we have to do with OMB around retaining some certain amount of auction revenues so that they can then give us those funds as Congress sets the cap. So just for example, so right now I believe we've got about a little bit less than 3 years worth of current auctions program in our auctions account at Treasury. So we're sort of funded, through at least the next 2 fiscal years and into the next. And then certainly this question of what is retained for future FCC use from the AWS-3 auction will be part of that discussion with OMB too.
So can it be carried over from previous years and previous auctions? And if so, you can carry over to the future auctions? And are there restrictions?
Well, OMB can keep the funds in an account, so the money is there. We certainly only can use what Congress sets our cap for, or if we've got approval to, reprogram funds, or if funds can be on a no-year basis moved from one to the
But
next.
they can go from one year next as long as they're within the cap.
Yeah, so our ability to spend the money is just set by the congressional appropriation process.
Okay.
The question
So when-
is the money there is OMB.
So when it goes above the cap, then it depends on appropriations process, you said.
Yeah,
It
well,
could- it would
we-
revert to the deficit reduction at that
Right,
point.
yeah, we can't go above our cap unless we got appropriator approval to do that through a reprogramming or something.
Okay, one other on a related note, given that there are no significant tranches of spectrum in the auction queue beyond the broadcast incentive auction scheduled for next year, and hopefully we can do some government auction eventually, and considering the request for an increase in the cap on retention and spending of auction proceeds, should we, because I believe in this budget request, there's an increase in the cap in the cap on retention and spending of the auction.
Yes, to 117, yes.
So should we expect the FCC to identify additional bands that could be brought to auction during the time after the incentive auction, which require funding to support these activities?
Well, certainly our experts in our auctions program and our wireless program, work with all the different government entities involved in spectrum planning, and certainly we want to be in the business of making spectrum available for use, so we will participate in that. And of course the question of what level of auctions is set aside so it funds our program. From a management standpoint, we try to make sure OMB thinks at least a few years ahead, so we don't run out of money. And of course, OMB wants to make sure the money is, used more broadly too. So that's just part of the ongoing dialogue.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate your answers in this and your forthrightness. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Appreciate his participation in the hearing. I'm going to yield a minute to Ms. Eshoo, who wanted to do some follow-up comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. The gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Johnson, you weren't back in the room yet, but he raised a very interesting point about asking Mr. Wilkins, would the FCC not have saved money, essentially, if in fact there were a legislative approach to the issue of net neutrality. And I think it's important to state for the record that, wherever people are on this, that's where they are.
Sure.
But I think that it's important to state for the record that that broadcasters sued after decisions were taken by the Congress. USF, there is a line as long as Independence Avenue of people that sued relative to what the Congress did and the lawsuits that were filed. Certainly, the incentive auction brought forward lawsuits. There was, previous action by the Congress on net neutrality, but I don't think it stands in the same area as the three that I just mentioned. So there's not a tidy answer to this. There just isn't. It's not one size fits all. Congress takes actions on a daily basis, and people sue. So it's not just one way or the other. And I just wanted to get that down for the record, and I appreciate your giving me the time. And Mr. Wilkins, I think you've just been a terrific witness because you're an effective person at the FCC in terms of the work that you do. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Gentlelady, for comments. And Mr. Wilkins, as you know, our committee is very interested in doing its due diligence here, just as you are at the commission. You know, we have a lot of questions we've given you to work on. And again, in my opening questions, there are some we'd really appreciate getting the answers to before the 5 commissioners are here in a little over 10 days. So we appreciate that, and we'll continue to go back and forth with you on the data requests that the committee's had. And again, thank you for the work you do down there, and thank you for participating in our hearing. And with that, we stand adjourned.
Thank you.
Oh, that was my.